Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Colton, and in today's video, I want to talk about why I purchased the Canon R7 and what that means for my lineup of cameras. So the reason that I picked this camera up was because of a trip that I was taking to Montana/Yellowstone, which I did last weekend. And if you want to see photos from this camera to see what I shot and what you can kind of expect out of this camera, I'll link that video in the description and also put a card here and also a card at the end of the video for you to check that out if you want to. But that very trip is a big reason why I picked up this particular camera. And it's because the trip was going to be so short, but also somewhere incredibly beautiful. So I really wanted to have the right gear to photograph. But at the same time, normally when I go on a trip like this, I have multiple days and I'll bring multiple cameras. I'll bring some kind of video camera, and then I'll bring one or two stills cameras. Usually one is like the Olympus E500, maybe another might be a film camera, and I'll get to play around with multiple tools on a trip like that. But being that this trip was only going to be 2 days, I felt like what would make the most sense would be to pack light and just bring one single camera. And that way I'm not constantly fumbling around grabbing a different camera. I can just have that one camera in my hands and focus all my efforts on getting good photos and even some B-roll video. And so that kind of ruled out my film cameras, it ruled out my medium format cameras, it ruled out my sort of niche fun cameras like the E500, E300, and it really only left two options for me, and that was the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark III or the Sony A6400. Now, the Olympus is a camera that does have great color science, great image stabilization. It's a wonderful photography tool, but I don't really have very good lens for it. I just have a little pancake zoom lens, and that's because I pretty much just use that camera as a casual photography tool when I'm gonna go to, a game night with some friends or a party, or I'm going out to a little event, or maybe I'm taking a weekend trip somewhere and I just want something quick that can do a little bit of B-roll video, but mostly can be a photography tool. So I haven't really invested in high quality glass for that system. But in addition to that, the video functions are not that good. It's an entry-level camera from several years ago. It has 4K video, but it's like the worst 4K video. It's enough to be able to throw 4K on the box, but the autofocus is not very good for video, and just the sort of depth of the file is so shallow. You can't make any mistake because there's no recovery possible. So it's just not a good tool for doing significant video type stuff. It doesn't even have a microphone input port on the camera, which is something I regularly use for lav mics and shotgun mics. So that really left only the Sony A6400. And while that camera is a really great video tool, I also only have the pancake lens for it because I've sold all of my Sony gear, starting with the Sony A7 III, and then basically all the lens for that have been sold. So I'm kind of stuck with the pancake lens there as well. But then adding to that is that I don't even like Sony color science. So the thought of taking that to somewhere so beautiful where colors could potentially be a big part of it just didn't seem appetizing to me. And then adding on top of that, there's no image stabilization. The battery life is really poor. It just seemed like it was going to be a hassle, especially for someone who 90% or more of the time is not going to be near a place to charge the camera. And so I realized there's kind of like a hole in my lineup. You know, I have my medium format cameras, which I use for all of my artistic work. You know, I've got the Sony A6400 that I do for the YouTube videos, the Olympus camera for more kind of casual stuff, but I don't have that one camera that can be versatile and can be used for multiple things. Could be the YouTube camera, but at the same time could also be used if I'm going out on a hike and I want to get really good photos, or if I need to do some portraits of some friends, or whatever it may be, I don't really have that all-in-one camera. And so knowing that this trip was coming up and knowing that I really wanted to take just one camera, I started to do some research into what potentially could replace my Sony a6400. I looked at the Sony a6700, but again, color science was a factor, and while that camera had a lot of improvements to the system that resolved most of my issues, the color science issue was still one that kind of bugged me a bit. I looked at Olympus, but they're really more photography based and they don't have really great video functionality. So I kind of ruled them out. Panasonic was next for me to take a look at, but mostly their cameras were really video focused and maybe not quite so photography focused, or they were just too expensive or didn't have all of the features that I needed. I looked at Nikon at one point, just didn't find anything there that addressed the types of specs that I needed out of a camera. And so then I looked at Canon, but very quickly pushed that aside because they didn't have any third-party lens support. And I've been someone who's bought into a camera brand with only first-party support before. It's not fun. So I ruled that out. And then I looked at Fujifilm, and I actually found something that I thought would fit the need, which is the Fujifilm XS20. And I still think that's a phenomenal camera that could have been just perfect for this. But when I went to test it out, the autofocus was atrocious. And that might have just been me not knowing how to get it set up just right. It might have been me being confused about the user interface and menu system, but it just seemed like it was focusing on all the wrong things, hunting, moving around a bunch. And I don't know, coming from the Sony, knowing that I could rely on the autofocus to nail it pretty much every time, it seemed like it would be a huge pain point for me to go to a system where I couldn't trust the autofocus would do it well. And so I may have overreacted a bit. I will also say at the time I had a headache, and I also wanted a specific lens, and they were telling me you can't get that lens and you should buy this other lens that I already know I don't want. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to back out of this. I'm going to go back to the drawing board and make sure there's not a better option. And in doing that, I heard that Canon on the APS-C side of things ended up allowing third-party support. And when I looked into it, Sigma had already released a lens 18 to 50 f2.8, which is a great range on this particular camera because it's a 30 to 80 millimeter full frame equivalent. And I don't shoot a lot of wide angle stuff. I shoot more telephoto. So the fact that it can reach all the way to 80 is worth me losing 24 and 28. I mean, 30 is wide enough for anything that I personally would be doing. So it actually made a lot of sense for me. And I started to look into the system again, and that's where I saw the R7. And it seemed like it kind of had everything that I was looking for, maybe minus the fact that on the Fujifilm, you could record in open gate, which is a really cool feature. And I wish that this Canon had that. I also wish it had, a high, megapixel shift mode with the image stabilization that so many other cameras have. But again, not a game changer for me. This camera had really great color science from the reviews that I read. It had a nice sharp lens that I was going to be able to attach to it. Image stabilization, as good, if not significantly better autofocus than the a6400. Really great ergonomics, way better battery life, just so many features that I thought, man, these are like all the things I've been complaining about on this a6400 and why I don't use it for anything other than videos. Now that's basically being addressed with this specific camera. And so I ended up pulling the trigger one day before Montana. I literally did no tests with this camera other than just some very light trying to get things set up, making sure I'm going to shoot in RAW, things like that. And I flew out the very next day to go to Montana and use it. Probably a bonehead move, because if it hadn't worked out, that would have been devastating to me. But the good news is it did work out, and the photos were phenomenal in my opinion. The video looked great. I did botch the video at one point though, because I accidentally had it set to 1080p video, which is a bummer, but lesson learned. Next time I'll make sure I have it set up perfectly correct, which of course it is now. But I found it to be so easy to use. It was fun to use. It did everything I needed, and the end result I was very pleased with. And so I feel very confident about this change. Of course, this means I will be selling the Sony a6400 and all of the remaining Sony gear that I have. But I think this is a good upgrade to something that now I can hold on to for a number of years and be able to continue to make good videos, well, hopefully good videos for this YouTube channel, but also have something a little bit more versatile that I can use to shoot better B-roll, short films, do photography, all of those great things that are of interest to me. So I wanted to share that with all of you, especially considering that I am someone who typically downgrades rather than upgrades. And so I wanted to explain why it is that I chose to upgrade and what benefit I was going to get out of it. So yeah, that's the video. If you have questions about my experience in researching any of these cameras, if you want to know anything about the Canon R7 or how I feel about it compared to the a6400 or anything like that, drop your questions below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And of course, at the end of this video, I'll have a link here to be able to watch the Montana video if you want to see some examples from this camera. But that said, if you enjoyed the video, do give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, or if you want to join me on my photographic journey, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell. That'll keep you in the know for when the next video drops. But otherwise, for now, I'm Colton. I'll see you in the next one.